It was supposed to be the kind of trip that healed a soul. After a brutal breakup and months of burnout from her marketing job, 27-year-old Lauren decided she needed isolation, no phones, no people, no noise. That's how she ended up driving 6 hours into the remote Oregon wilderness to rent a small cabin she'd found online. The listing promised complete solitude and a true escape from the modern world. It was exactly what she thought she wanted. The cabin was old but charming, tucked away among towering pine trees and surrounded by miles of unbroken forest. The dirt road leading to it was barely wide enough for her car, winding deeper and deeper until her GPS gave up and her phone's signal disappeared entirely. That made her uneasy for a moment, but she brushed it off. That's the point, she reminded herself. The first day passed peacefully. Lauren unpacked, lit a fire in the wood stove, and read a book by the window while watching the golden light fade between the trees. It felt almost cinematic, the way the wind rustled the branches, the way dusk settled quietly over the forest. That night, she fell asleep to the sound of rain tapping against the roof, comforted by the soft isolation she'd been craving. The second night was different. She woke suddenly just after midnight, heart hammering though she didn't know why. The rain had stopped. The forest was silent, too silent. That's when she heard it, a faint scratching sound at the back door. It was subtle at first, like a tree branch brushing against the wood. But then it happened again. And again, slow, deliberate, like fingernails. Lauren sat up in bed, straining to listen. Her first thought was that it had to be an animal, a raccoon, maybe, or a stray dog. But then, clear as day, there came a knock. 3 slow, heavy knocks. Knock, knock, knock. She froze. No one knew she was here. She hadn't seen another person in miles since leaving the main road. Her phone had no signal, and there was no landline in the cabin. Slowly, she slid out of bed and tiptoed to the small kitchen window that overlooked the back porch. The darkness outside was thick and impenetrable, her reflection staring back at her from the glass. She squinted, trying to catch a glimpse of movement. Nothing. The knocking didn't come again, but for the next hour, Lauren sat awake in bed, gripping the flashlight she kept by her side. Every sound, a creak of the old wooden floorboards, the distant snap of a branch, made her heart skip. When dawn finally crept through the trees, she felt foolish for having been so scared. That was until she stepped outside. The damp ground around the cabin was crisscrossed with footprints. They circled the structure over and over, weaving close to the windows, then drifting away into the trees. They weren't animal prints, they were unmistakably human. And some were fresh, the edges still sharp in the mud. But what unsettled Lauren most was that some prints looked older, weathered by rain. Whoever had been there, had been coming back. She considered packing up and leaving then and there, but a stubborn part of her didn't want fear to ruin the trip. Maybe it was a lost hiker or a hunter passing through. Maybe they had left. She spent the day reading and hiking near the cabin, though she found herself glancing over her shoulder more than once. That night, as darkness swallowed the forest again, she tried to convince herself she'd imagined it. She locked every door and window and climbed into bed early. The scratching returned just after 1 a.m. Louder this time, not at the door, at her bedroom window. Then came the slow footsteps circling the cabin. Once, twice, then stopping beneath her window. Lauren held her breath. Silence stretched for what felt like hours. Then, from somewhere outside, a voice whispered, faint but unmistakable. Lauren. Her blood turned to ice. She hadn't told anyone where she was going. No one should know her name. Grabbing the kitchen knife, she shouted into the darkness that she was armed. The footsteps stopped. Nothing moved. Then, soft as a feather, something slid under the front door. It was a piece of paper, folded in half and damp from the rain. With trembling hands, she picked it up and unfolded it. Scrawled in messy, uneven handwriting were 3 chilling words. You shouldn't be here. Lauren didn't wait for morning. She grabbed her bag, bolted into the night, and sped down the dirt road until the cabin was nothing but a memory in her rearview mirror. Days later, when police searched the property, they found no footprints, no note, nothing unusual. But behind the cabin, buried among the trees, they discovered a small wooden cross planted in the earth. Carved into it, with deep, jagged letters, was Lauren's name. The autumn of 1998 was unseasonably warm when brothers Michael and Sean decided to take a weekend camping trip deep into the Appalachian wilderness. They had spent much of their childhood exploring those same woods, so when Sean suggested venturing deeper than they'd ever gone before, to a remote fishing spot whispered about by locals, Michael eagerly agreed. It was supposed to be an adventure, just two brothers reconnecting away from work, city noise, and responsibility. But when they stopped at a small supply shop on the edge of town, the cashier, an older man with weathered eyes, gave them a strange warning. "If you're headed past Black Hollow," he said, "you might want to turn back before dark. Folks say the Watcher doesn't like company." They laughed it off, chalking it up to local superstition. They'd heard stories about the Watcher of Black Hollow. Growing up, a faceless figure said to guard the woods, stalking anyone who stayed too long. As kids, they'd even dared each other to whisper its name after sunset. It was just folklore, or so they thought. The first day of their trip was perfect. They hiked through a carpet of red and gold leaves, found the hidden stream they'd heard about, and spent hours fishing beneath the dappled light of the forest canopy. They set up camp near the water's edge and built a fire, laughing as they cooked their catch over the flames. That night, the air was cool and crisp, and the forest hummed with life, crickets chirping, owls calling in the distance. The second night was different. It started with silence, the kind that pressed against your eardrums and made your skin crawl. Michael woke around 1 a.m. to Sean shaking his shoulder. "Do you hear that?" his brother whispered. At first, he didn't. But then it came, slow, deliberate footsteps crunching over fallen leaves. Someone, or something, was walking in a circle around their tent. Michael called out into the darkness, demanding whoever it was to show themselves. The footsteps stopped immediately. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, from behind the tent, a voice whispered, soft and hoarse, but clear as day. "Leave." Both brothers froze. The voice was close, almost right behind the thin fabric of the tent. Michael grabbed the hunting knife from his pack, and Sean swung the flashlight toward the sound. They burst out of the tent, lights sweeping across the trees, but there was no one there. No footsteps, no movement, nothing, except, their fire was out. Completely, not smoldering, not dying, drenched, as if someone had dumped a bucket of water over it. Uneasy and shaken, they decided to break camp and head back before sunrise. But packing up was slow work in the dark, and the feeling of being watched grew heavier with each passing minute. They kept hearing faint snaps and rustles just beyond the beam of their flashlights. Every time they turned, the forest was still again. They started their hike back before dawn, sticking close to the trail they'd marked on the way in. But the deeper they walked into the woods, the stranger things became. At times, it felt like the forest itself was rearranging. Paths they swore they'd taken before seemed unfamiliar, landmarks they recognized now looked different. And always, they heard footsteps behind them. Not close enough to see, but near enough to know they weren't alone. At one point, Sean stopped abruptly, flashlight trembling in his hand. "Did you see that?" he whispered. Michael followed his gaze and, for a fraction of a second, saw it too, a tall, impossibly thin figure standing motionless between two trees. Its limbs were too long, its posture too still. And just as quickly as they saw it, it was gone. Panic surged. They didn't speak again, just walked faster, nearly running as the woods seemed to close in around them. By the time the sky began to lighten, their nerves were frayed and their hearts pounding. Then, finally, they saw it, the familiar trailhead that led back to the road. Relief hit them like a wave, until they noticed what was hanging from a low branch above the path. It was a small, crude figure, twisted from sticks and bound with twine, shaped like a person. Dangling from its neck was Sean's pocketknife, the same knife he had lost inside their tent the night before. They stared in horror. Whoever, whatever, had been watching them hadn't just followed them. It had been inside their camp, inside their tent. They didn't wait to question how. They bolted, sprinting the last stretch of the trail and not stopping until they reached the safety of their truck. Neither brother spoke a word during the drive home. They told no one what happened. But years later, Michael admitted in a hushed voice that some nights, when the wind was still, he could hear slow, deliberate footsteps circling his house. And sometimes, just before he drifted off to sleep, a voice, low and hoarse, would whisper through his window. "Leave." In the summer of 2015, 33-year-old Daniel Harris set out on what was supposed to be a routine solo hiking trip in the dense forests of northern Maine. He was no amateur, an experienced outdoorsman with dozens of successful treks under his belt and a growing online following where he documented his adventures. Daniel prided himself on pushing deeper into wilderness than most people dared, capturing untouched landscapes and hidden trails. This time, however, his journey would never make it to the internet. Daniel parked his truck at a remote trailhead on a cool August morning, leaving a note with his expected return date, 5 days later. He was seen by a ranger that day, cheerful and excited, but after that, no one heard from him again. When he failed to return, a search party was launched. They scoured the forest for weeks, finding nothing but his campsite, tent still pitched, backpack leaning against a tree, and his camera equipment neatly set up on a tripod. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no broken branches suggesting a wild animal attack. It was as if Daniel had simply vanished into thin air. For months, the case remained cold. Then, a hunter stumbled upon a narrow cave hidden behind a curtain of vines nearly 5 miles from Daniel's campsite. Inside, authorities discovered a single item resting on a flat rock, Daniel's camera. The SD card was still inside. Investigators watched the footage in a small, dimly lit room, and what they saw disturbed them deeply. The early clips were exactly what you'd expect, Daniel laughing into the lens, talking about the beauty of the forest, showing his route on a map. "No signal out here," he joked in one video, "so if you're watching this, either I'm back, or you found this after I wasn't." He laughed at his own morbid humor. But as the days went on, the tone changed. In one clip, filmed on the 3rd day, Daniel looked unsettled. "I feel like I'm not alone out here," he whispered into the camera. "I know that sounds crazy, but I keep hearing footsteps at night, slow, heavy ones. I thought it was a deer, but deer don't stop and just stand there for hours." He turned the camera toward the treeline. "Nothing but darkness. I swear I saw someone watching me last night," he added. "Too tall to be an animal. But when I shined the light, it was gone." The next few clips showed Daniel growing more paranoid. He began filming short, frantic updates. "It's not animals. I heard breathing outside the tent. I yelled, nothing. But when I checked, my gear had been moved." In another, he held up a small, crudely carved wooden figurine he said he found hanging from a branch above his campsite. "This wasn't here before," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder. "Someone's messing with me." Then came the final video, one that investigators replayed dozens of times, each viewing more unsettling than the last. It begins with Daniel's face illuminated by the faint glow of a flashlight. He looks terrified. "They're outside," he whispers, voice trembling. "I can hear them moving. They've been circling the tent for hours. They whisper sometimes, but I can't understand the words." A noise cuts through the silence, a sharp, heavy rustling just beyond the camera's reach. Daniel spins toward the sound. "Who's there?" he shouts, but the only response is more rustling, closer now. The camera jerks wildly as Daniel bolts into the woods, panting heavily as branches whip against the lens. "I have to get out, I have to." His voice cuts off in a strangled cry. Then he stops. The camera tumbles to the ground, landing on its side. For several seconds, nothing moves. Only Daniel's ragged breathing can be heard. Then, faintly, another sound, breathing, but not his. Slow, calm, deliberate. And then it steps into view. Bare, filthy feet, long, emaciated legs. The figure bends down slowly, unnaturally, until its face hovers just above the lens. Pale, expressionless, eyes so dark they look hollow. It tilts its head as if studying the camera, or the viewer, and then, without warning, the screen goes black. That was the last anyone saw of Daniel Harris. The footage remains locked away in evidence, and the case is still officially open, though no trace of him has ever been found. Experienced search teams combed every inch of the forest, but there was nothing, no body, no clothing, no sign he was ever there. And yet, hikers who wander too deep into those woods still report unsettling encounters. They speak of a gaunt, silent figure watching from the shadows, of distant, labored breathing that follows them as they walk. Some even claim to hear frantic footsteps running deeper into the forest, footsteps that sound eerily human, as if someone is still trying to escape. Some believe it's Daniel, others think it's the thing that took him. Either way, one truth remains: in the deepest part of that main forest, something watches, and it doesn't let people leave.